community members in Nacogdoches are starting local discussions to become part of a national organization that they say can help improve the city. East Texas News Weekend's Mariela Gonzalez visited the group today.
Common goal. We want to make it a better town.
A dozen Nacogdoches residents met this afternoon to discuss changes they wish to see in their city and how to get more community members involved.
A lot of people also say when they first come to Nacogdoches, like, oh, this town's 10 years behind the time. So we can take it, start where we are, and move forward with what we want.
Anne Keehnen of Nacogdoches says the city has a lot of potential with the changes already happening, including the new I-69 construction and the bond election that passed earlier this week. She says it's important to remember big changes can also start as smaller actions and says that's where strong towns come into place.
Things happening from the bottom up, things happening incrementally.
According to the Strong Towns website, they are a nonprofit organization that helps provide resources to communities that want to see safe, livable, and inviting changes in their area. Brandy Cartwright of Nacogdoches spoke about the possibility of bringing a bike route to the city.
I thought maybe we could work over the next couple months and make a bunch of these and find people who would put them in their yards along a route.
Other items of discussion included code compliance follow-ups and South Street revitalization.
We're not doing anything big or dramatic right now. We're mostly having conversations and having ideas and then trying new things.
Mariela Gonzalez, East Texas News Weekend.
Nacogdoches Strong Town plans to meet again after the new year.